What can you tell me about, people in the Midwest?
I think Midwest people definitely have a different value set than people in other parts of the country, for sure. There's different things that Midwestern people tend to focus on and value. Tradition is valued a little bit more in the Midwest. It's really evident by how crazy people are about college football in the Midwest. I remember that growing up.
Yeah.
It's like people are so into college football, like way more into college football than pro sports, which I always found interesting. It's like there's something about the sort of like tribalism of college sports that the Midwest loves. Yeah, there definitely is like a Midwest hospitality. There definitely is people love inviting you into their homes, taking care of you. Midwest it's just a different world.
Where's that come from, Trace? Is it the weather? We got it here like in SoCal or California where it's like nice and sunny every day, but the weather just beats the shit out of you.
Absolutely. I think the weather plays a huge role. I mean, just think like from a survival perspective, the fact that there's a large chunks of the year are like so cold and the weather's so extreme that you can't like go outside and do normal things like the rest of the country can. So that puts you in a different kind of mindset as far as surviving and living your life. You also have, you don't have as many artists and creatives in the Midwest because if the artists and the creatives really kind of move out west and go to the coast. So it's flat out different industries, different mindset. A lot of the industries are more, kind of like I remember in Grand Rapids where I grew up, it was, furniture was the thing, and furniture and, beer and, it's a little bit more like producing actual like physical goods. And on the coast and stuff, it's more, creating art and stuff. So it's just it's just a completely different world. I'm very grateful to have grown up in Michigan because I love that it gave me a kind of new, I grew up with different perspectives. So I didn't just, if I were, just born in Los Angeles, I would only have, obviously Los Angeles has a lot of different perspectives, but it was good to grow up in the Midwest just to kind of get that different view and see how a lot of people live their lives in a lot of ways people orient themselves towards life. I'm very glad though that I also moved from the Midwest and don't live there anymore. I would not choose to live there anymore.
Because we gave the Midwest their flowers, and now we could say what doesn't work for the Midwest about us. If you're more creative, it feels like it's very barren there to me for the most part, right? It seems like I could just feel it in the air in LA when I'm walking around. Like I'm just constantly feeling inspired. Mm-hmm.
That's one of the best parts about LA is just how many creative people are creating amazing things, how many just great ideas there are. You can just feel you just feel the energy of a place.
It's palpable, dude.
It's totally palpable. Yeah. You just feel the energy. And it's really, really inspiring. Like if you're really creating something and you're really, want to be inspired by that kind of energy, cities like LA are great.
Totally. Well, let's shift to music. Speaking of creative, because you're really into hip hop. So like, what was like the first hip hop record that like got you?
Great question. And it was actually, so my dad's a musician. One of his many titles. We growing up, there was always different kinds of music being played around the house. He was always exposed. That was one of the things I really appreciated that my dad did as far as music, is he was always constantly in the car. We would have like, back when you didn't have the aux cord where you could just plug the phone in, it was like you'd have in the car there would be like 6 slots for CDs. So he would have like 6 different CDs of like different genres. So it'd be like Rage Against the Machine, Blur, Coldplay. I remember driving around Grand Rapids, Michigan. I must have been like 8 or 9. Maybe I was a little younger than that. And he bought Jay-Z's album. I don't remember which album it was. I think it was either Unplugged or maybe it was the Black Album. I think it was the Black Album. And Jay-Z was the first rap I heard. And Jay-Z was the first time I like fell in love with rap.
Your dad actually turned you on to your first hip hop album? That's kind of
it's
unexpected.
Totally, okay. And I remind him of it all the time, because sometimes he'll listen to like new rap and he'll be like, man, he's like, I just don't, rap just sounds so, I don't really understand it. He does this kind of like old man thing a little bit of like, man, this is so new to me. And I'm like, Dad, you're the one that showed me rap. You're the one that like showed me, you're the one that got me first into this. So Yeah, I think it was Jay-Z was the first album he played that I was like, okay, I finally like I really fell in love with rap. And then I remember he bought Kanye West, College Dropout, Late Registration, and Graduation. And he bought all three of those albums. So it was funny how it first started off with like one rap album in that like 6 CD slot in the car, and then it turned to like quickly I got like 4 albums, and then it quickly became the majority in that in the car. So Jay-Z was the first. That Black album. I remember listening like Dirt Off Your Shoulder and Moment of Clarity on that album. Those were some of the songs.
That was not the answer I thought you were going to give, but that's great. Okay. The next place I want to take this conversation is, for me, why I loved working in music and why I have, so many musician friends. They're able to convey things that I think a lot of us are feeling, especially with those heavier emotions that like a lot of people don't feel comfortable sharing, right? So the human experience is like very much, like this, right? And in those down moments, I feel like, man, people just don't feel comfortable sharing. And what happens is in those down moments, I feel like it ends up making us feel more isolated and disconnected. So there's a reason why I called this podcast Connection is Magic, because, the same way that I feel like a song that you listen to can have an effect, making you feel not as alone, making you feel connected. I think conversations have the power to do that as well.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Connection, period. I mean, that's what so many people desire, and that's what so many people seek, is so many people live these fragmented lives. Some people just don't have a lot of connections that are very meaningful in their life. So whether it be through music, conversations about music, there's the connecting with another human on that kind of deeper levels is really satisfying just for the soul.
Your dad's a pretty well-known author, and I feel like I remember he's done shows for a while, right? I remember being at one of his shows like way back in the day, and he had this weird looking whiteboard. Have you seen this board? It's like
the Everything is Spiritual tour.
I want to relay something I heard him say and see how this sits with you. So he's like, a lot of our darkest, most challenging moments in life, like end up being like our biggest blessing on the other side. Talking about almost tying into what you're saying about how things like correct, how the pendulum swings. It's like things can be so bad, but then it comes back. You know what I'm saying? And then you're like, oh my God, whoa, what a gift. Just tell me how that sits with you, that whole idea of how life kind of works that way. Well,
I love that you brought that up, because that to me is one of the sort of main value. I don't know what wording I would use here, but I would say it's one of the main values of spirituality to me, is to see that a spiritual perspective on life is seeing that life is being done for us rather than life happening to us. So a lot of people have this sort of victim state about life, of life is constantly happening to me. There's all these outside factors that are against me. Life is this like thing that I'm at the mercy of and I'm victim to. And so bad things in my life are just bad things that happen to me, and I'm a victim to these bad things. And seeing the perspective of life is actually happening for us, which is oftentimes a more kind of mature spiritual perspective, is seeing that even the bad things in our life they still taught us something. They're still for our growth. And what my dad's done such an amazing job teaching is like the moments that caused the most suffering, the most pain, oftentimes triggered the most growth and the most expansion.
100%.
So that ability to just see, you still acknowledge the pain of the painful moments of your life. You don't just diminish them at all. You just fit them in a larger perspective. You fit them in this perspective where you're seeing all of it as being done for you, and you're not a victim to that circumstance. That circumstance actually grew you. So life grows us and expands us through the good moments, and it also grows us and expands us through the low moments.
Almost more so through the harder moments.
Totally.
I've been through many of these moments in my life, dude. It's almost like being pushed off of a skyscraper, being like thinking you're gonna die, and like you're like going down. You're like, oh my God, this is insane. But then when you land, it's on like a bed of feathers or something. It's like, oh, like, whoa. And there's kind of a profound quote out there by this author, Terrence McKenna, who talks about this.
Love him.
Yeah. Oh, you know him. Okay, right. Yeah. His quote goes something like, to fling yourself into the abyss and realize it was a bed of feathers or something. I'm like, man, that's dope to me. We started off talking about hip hop particularly. And there's so much strife with a lot of these hip hop artists. I mean, growing up in like abject poverty, obviously like all the racial implications and the system riding against you, and just coming out of that, it's sort of creating this diamond in a lot of cases. That's kind of one of the things that draws me into hip hop, man, is I love seeing that so much,
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons that, I mean, hip hop, I think it was it 2 years ago or a couple of years ago, surpassed rock as the number one genre in the US. It's like, it's the number one genre now. And I think it's because hip hop has the most compelling storylines. Everyone, it's constantly, when you listen to rap, there's constantly, the energy and the storyline behind the stories and the music is just so compelling, and anyone can get behind it. It's an absolutely wild genre. And it's a tragedy that there's a certain demographic that has to go through so much pain and suffering, and we've created the system there's so much inequality. And again, I'm very optimistic about the future of sort of leveling out some of that inequality, and I'm totally support reparations for African Americans and some economic initiatives that actually would get these people some safety nets and some structural underpinning. But the genre is just a fascinating genre, and you're absolutely right. There's that story of rising up from nothing to becoming successful is always a compelling story.
I love it. I love it. It's just, not to say like, I don't, we don't respect other people that didn't come from that, but there's something about that.
There's also tons of great rappers who didn't come from poverty too. I mean, the idea that you need to come from poverty and have this sort of rags to riches story to make great music is totally not true.
Childish Gambino, if I'm not mistaken, I think he comes from pretty well means, if I'm not mistaken, and he's a pretty awesome rapper.
I mean, that's one of the really cool things about rap too, is you're seeing all these different people from different areas with different stories, weaving their stories in. It's like rap has become so much more kind of like universal, and seeing the different stories in it now are really fascinating.
I had on Tyler, the Creator's manager, was like one of the last episodes, and he talks about basically kind of being told no and how that could put some people in a very depressive place and all. It's like, but then it can also fuel some people, right? Talk to me about in your path, if you felt dismissed or you had some talent that wasn't being recognized. How did you walk through that?
Great question. And so one of the interesting things about growing up for me was we moved around a lot. We moved a lot around Michigan, so I was changing schools a lot. And then when we moved to California, we moved around to California a couple of times, and I changed schools a lot. So it was very interesting for me. My school career, I was whatever school I went, I was very social and I had a lot of friends, but I never played on any of the sports teams later in high school because we were moving so much. So it was too hard to like stick on a sports team. I never got into like the AP classes, even though I probably should have been in some of those classes. I never really got into the more advanced classes. So school was very weird and disorienting for me because I kind of just like went through it, but I could never really find my place in school. So I was very confused at where I fit in. I get places and people like me and I have friends, but like I don't really have a place like in the more advanced classes. I don't really have a place in any of the sports teams. I kind of just kind of like roam around and I can't really find my place. And then I went to Fairfax High School in Los Angeles, met a lot of great people there. Didn't get a lot of learning done there. Not the greatest school. It's an LAUSD underfunded. It's very sad. It's not a very, there wasn't a lot of learning there. So that was my senior year. I couldn't really figure out my path. So I ended up going to Cal State LA because it was like one of the colleges I could get into. I was just not stimulated. I was really bored there. The classes weren't challenging for me. Then I went to Los Angeles City College my sophomore year. Again, I was really bored there, but got good grades. And then I transferred to UCLA. And I'm telling this story to just say, like, I don't know if it was exactly feeling dismissed, but I never could figure out my place. I never could figure out, like, should I be going, what kind of college should I be going to? How it was because my high school career was so fragmented and we moved around. Let's
break that down, Trace, if you don't mind. Like, what were you feeling quite sad about that at times, or
just kind of confused? I think I didn't even really like know enough to be like sad. I was just kind of confused because also we had we'd moved to LA when I was 17. So right there during my senior year. So I had like friends at school, but I didn't really have a ton of, I just didn't really like know a ton of people in LA yet. And I was just kind of like confused at what I should be doing. Just to fast forward in the story. So I get to UCLA and it's like, okay, like here I actually feel, somewhat challenged by my classes. I actually finally figured out like this is probably UCLA, like a top academic university. It's like, okay, this is more my place. But then quickly at UCLA, I got so bored of UCLA. I wasn't able to find my place. It's so academic and just kind of everything exists within the head that it felt very soulless, and it felt very kind of lifeless in a lot of ways. It felt like it felt sort of like a school kind of like factory almost, where it was just pushing you through. And it was really lacking. There was no sort of talk of anything deeper spiritually. There was no sort of connection that anyone had to anything larger than just themselves. It felt really kind of soulless and lifeless. So then I got to UCLA. Quickly, UCLA, I felt super out of place at UCLA. Throughout my school career, it's been very strange how I've just kind of felt out of place and confused about where I fit in. Now that I've been, a year out of UCLA and started working, I had some pretty profound spiritual awakenings after I graduated college. And then
don't breeze over that. Like I want to
know
what those were.
I'm putting some interesting details that we can come back to. So I had some big awakenings, and then I started teaching with my dad. I started doing more podcasts with him. I did a series called Saturday School with him, where we taught together. And then I started working with people directly. So I started doing my own courses, my own sessions where I was working with people, my own classes, and actually working with people and teaching spirituality, teaching consciousness is like the first time that I've felt like, okay, here's my place. You know what I mean? All this stuff throughout
Dharma,
my life,
it's called, right?
totally. All these things throughout my life felt kind of fragmented, and I couldn't really find my place in school, and it was very strange. I had friends, but didn't really have a lot of like deep connections with them because I couldn't really fully relate to them. You know what it is? I felt dismissed by the kind of academic system and the kind of system I grew up in. It's like I just felt like I wasn't fully. School was always a little boring to me. I did well, but it was always kind of boring to me. I just never felt like it really met me where I was at. And
primarily because you felt there wasn't enough heart in that realm, right?
Totally, yeah. I just felt very, very mind dominated, which I can do. I did great in school, and I can do the mind stuff. But to me, it was lacking heart, and it was lacking. Once I had my awakenings, I realized why that whole school system really felt like it kind of failed me. It was because it never actually. It didn't integrate the heart. It only just stayed up in the mind. The thing that always fascinated me most was consciousness. All of our experience we perceive through consciousness. It's always right here, but I can't really describe it. I can't really put my finger on it. I can't really give it like a shape or a texture or a color. Like, what is consciousness? It's like it's always here, but you can't put your finger on it. It's kind of it's like invisible. So consciousness.
And why is that? Don't you feel like because like a lot of that we're so inundated with stimulus that it kind of makes us forget it's right here? I feel like
consciousness is the beautiful mystery that's staring us all in the face 24/7. This is why I love consciousness, is because it's such a paradox. We miss it because it's always right here. It's hidden right in plain sight. It's always right here. It's always right now. So I remember as a kid reading about, there's a thing called the hard problem of consciousness, which is science hasn't come up with an adequate theory for how the brain produces consciousness, because it's believed by mainstream science that, well, consciousness is just something that's produced by our brain. It's just material interactions that produce consciousness, which we know that the brain correlates with our experience and impacts our experience. But the idea that somehow when matter, because they say the brain is made out of matter, somehow when matter reaches enough complexity, they just say it just magically produces consciousness. But there's no actual theory for how the brain just magically produces consciousness. It'd be like saying if you put enough cards in a deck, then the card would learn how to play poker. The richness of subjective experience, how that somehow is magically produced by just complexity of matter, has never been actually explained because it's too big of a leap. So this is a thing. The hard problem of consciousness is actually a thing in academic and philosophical and scientific circles, because it's the hard problem is there's actually not a way to adequately explain how matter produces consciousness.
So it's all theories at this point then, right?
It's totally all theories, because we can't figure out how the brain somehow gives rise to subjective experience. That's never been explained. So I was reading that as a kid. So I was always like, okay, hold on. This thing that's always fascinating me, consciousness, that's always here, always right now. Science is people just kind of walk around and science is telling me that this is produced by the brain. And this just, this consciousness, when your body dies and your brain dies, then your consciousness goes with it. But at the same time, they're literally admitting that they don't have a theory for how the brain produces consciousness. Wait, hold on. This whole thing is way more mysterious and wacky than a lot of people are giving it credit for. So consciousness was always the thing that fascinated me most. And I would ask my dad questions about it. It was like the mystery that sat at the heart of reality for me. We talk about, low moments actually being triggers for growth and expansion. I was so frustrated and angry at the end of UCLA. I was so frustrated with the whole experience. I was so frustrated by the fact that I felt like I had finally found my place, and then it ended up not being my place. I was just kind of frustrated with life itself. And it felt like that because I was so frustrated with life itself, because there was like such a low moment, it showed me like I can't keep living from this perspective. I can't keep living from this negative perspective that's mad at the world, that's mad at life, that feels like life is being done to me rather than life happening for me. So life happening to us rather than for us, that's a constant challenge. That's part of the human drama and part of the human experience. Even the most mature, advanced spiritual person still deals with that in their life.
I will say this though, as somebody that's like gone through the near-death experience, chronic health issues, constant bullying in school. Like I've had a million of these, right? And I think one of the things that gets overlooked with age is it's true. Like as you age and go through more of these, there's just a little more grace. Not to say it like it's never easy to go through these things, but you are able to do it with a little bit more grace because you've got a little bit more, hindsight in you. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And you learned from all those experiences too. And you took those experiences as invitations to grow. So like now you are handling those future experiences in your life. You're handling them from such a more mature and evolved place, which is really, really commendable because a lot of people don't do that. But you're absolutely right. Life is handing you challenges so that you grow, so that you evolve, so that when you have challenges later in your life, you're able to handle them even better.
A little more grace, Trace.
A little more grace, absolutely. Yeah. But I think the challenge to see that life is happening for us rather than to us is something that life is constantly presenting us with challenges and obstacles that are testing that muscle and strengthening that muscle.
Yes.
So I'm definitely
like being an endurance athlete, man. How are we going to be able to run that, marathon, right? Unless we're in the gym. Life gives us plenty of opportunities, Trace, to be in the gym doing reps.
Absolutely.
Right. But the key is, and the work that I'm doing too, is trying to help people that have these adverse experiences and try and put them down the channel of, no, this could be a beautiful thing for you in the bigger picture of your life. Your story doesn't have to end in this chapter here. There's a book being written. You're in the chapter. People get confused between this is the entire book or this is just a chapter of the entire book. You know what I'm saying?
That's a great way to put it. I mean, that's such important work to help people see, what they're going through, that challenge. It's part of a larger overall story.
Yes.
Like going back to rap, like you were talking about, I mean, I think that's one of the great things that hip hop does is there's so much struggle and so much pain and so much suffering. And and that music has integrated that story within the music. That's integrated that struggle of a lot of those musicians is part of the story. Rap isn't like, woe is me, my life sucks.
Right there. Yes.
It's the opposite of that. It's look how great I am. Life is great. And I'm talking about my struggles in the context of how great life is. The thing that always was the most impressive to me about my dad is that he always he always authentically lived everything he was teaching. All the Bible teachings, all the Jesus teachings, I could see over time that it was making him a better parent, a more loving human. I could see that it was just making him a better, more vibrant human. And I've always been, no matter how successful my dad got, he's never let that, he's never had like an ego. He's never let that sort of, he's never let that give him too big of an ego. I've always been so impressed, and I loved the fact that my dad it's always interesting. My dad is always asking more questions than other people are asking him when we're just in normal settings. My dad's very, very curious. That was another value I loved from my dad, was just how curious he was. And he was always, no matter who it is, he's always asking questions about their life, asking questions about what they know about. No matter how successful he got, he was always the one asking people questions, curious about their lives.
When I worked in the music business, in a professional capacity, I was at major labels and stuff like that. I was always like in awe of people that had, done significant things and seen a lot of success and still remained humble. That was the one thing that I was drawn towards. And the people who weren't humble anymore, and that's just always a turnoff to me. I don't know why. It's just hard to be around that. So, I appreciate you sharing that. The second thing you shared was curiosity, and how he's remained curious. I did listen to the audio book not long ago of Everything is Spiritual. I think he dropped that one last year. The quote that stuck out to me was when he said, curiosity can be an antidote to despair. I don't know if you remember him like that. That was in the book. And I was like, dude, that's good. Because when you're in despair, when something's gone sideways, back to the earlier part of our conversation, the easy thing to do is to get flattened out by it and just think that this is all bad. But curiosity is like what allows us to get to the place where, no, this is happening for me, not to me. How is this happening for me? Right.
That's a beautiful line. Yeah. I'm glad you reminded me of that line, because when we're curious about something and we have curiosity, it's showing us that we have wonder and awe about something. There's something that's inspiring wonder and awe in us. And to me, spirituality is about having wonder and awe about the full experience. Curiosity is the engine of spirituality. That was one of the things that I appreciated most about growing up in my household, is that curiosity was such an important value.